Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Powell. So as you said, I'm the founder of Emerald Lane Recruitment. We're a global recruitment and human capital advisory firm that focuses exclusively across the cannabis industry supply chain. We are now in 13 countries and 8 states, and I've been in the industry for 10 years. I had a corporate life before. I'm from Toronto. I worked for the federal government. I worked for Health Canada, and on the state level for cancer management, chemotherapy. Got quite disenchanted by the healthcare system and how patients were treated. Moved over to Bay Street, which is the Wall Street of Toronto. Got to sit at the right hand on asset management trading floors, and with a company that became Corpay, which was sold for $250 million the year after I left. So definitely saw that preparation because I was the co-founder's assistant. So got to know everything from the business on that side. And then ultimately found myself in Humboldt County, a bit of a side detour, and fell into recruiting in the industry 8 years ago. So now we work with operators across the industry. And when I joined the Canadian market, if anyone knows the good old stories in the good old days, I got there right as the markets were starting to go up, and then we saw sort of what happened there. So everything I talk about is from the talent lens. It's a lot of my knowledge and my wisdom is not just mine. It's all the conversations I get to have every day with the people who have built this industry from the ground up. And I'm really excited to contribute to this conversation today.
Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Jeanne Sullivan. She is Chief Inspiration Officer of Sullivan Adventures, co-manager of a fund many of you are aware of, Arcview Group umbrella. I will tell you that Jeanne is the type of person, when we all met, I said we should get a t-shirt made with all the different venues that she's speaking at weekly internationally. I mean, she's one of the most respected speakers around the world. We're happy to have her, Jeanne.
Aren't you kind? I'll take all the love I can get. Jeanne Sullivan, happy to be here. I'm a longtime VC in tech before I took a sharp left turn into this crazy, zany, unbelievable business. Once you're down that hole, you can't get out. This was 12 years ago, and I've been part of the Arcview team and working with Jeff Finkel, who is the CEO of Arcview now. And in the last, when COVID hit, our wonderful events went away. And Jeff and I built a fund. We invested in 22 cannabis companies, and we're nurturing and harvesting them now. And then I have fun advising operators and looking for opportunities. There's a lot of great distress. When I say great, guess what? Terrific opportunities. So we'll talk about some of that today too. Back to you, Tony.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now introduce Ron Eppen. He is co-chairman of the Cannabis team and partner of the law firm of Lardner, LLP, one of the leading law firms in cannabis. I should tell you that this group, when he started it, they were ahead of their time as far as saying, we need to form this group now, get ahead of it before cannabis really takes off. That's what he did with his group. We're proud to have him here. Ron, if you'd spend a moment and tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Tony. You're too kind with that intro. I will just say it really wasn't so much a matter of us organizationally being ahead of the curve, so much as it was a bunch of us just started doing cannabis work without permission, and by the time the firm figured it out, it was too late to stop us.
Love that.
I come to this from an M&A, private equity, venture capital background. I did most of my work as a junior lawyer and as a young partner in life sciences and technology-based companies. But there was sort of a natural segue to the cannabis sector out of life sciences when the first wave of legalizations started around 2010. So I've been doing mainly M&A, but also some capital markets transactions and some private finance deals as well. Love working in the industry. I will say I'm thinking back on all the transactions that I've done. Never fails to surprise me how each and every one of them comes up with at least one or two completely unanticipated, unique things.
That's a great point. As many of you people in the room know, there is no two transactions the same, even if it's the same buyer and seller. Every deal is different. Finally, someone who I've known a very long time, I consider a good friend, Michael Hennessy. He's a longstanding member of the cannabis community, proud partner at Lineage Merchant Partners. They are an investment banking and financial advisory firm. Perfect person to have on this panel. Michael.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be here. Glad to be sharing the stage with you guys here. I probably got into this space. The first event that I ever went to was at an Arcview conference. So full circle, Jeanne. And Ron, we've done quite a few deals together, but I would just say about Lineage, we're one of the leading cannabis investment banks. We've done probably approaching $1 billion in transaction value across buy and sell side engagements, as well as capital markets advisory. So excited to talk some more about the challenges and depth of some of the deals that we've been a part of.
Thank you, Michael. You know, one of the things I think is the biggest risk in acquisitions, and it's something that I talk about in my business, is cultures. You're typically bringing two different cultures together when you're bringing two businesses together. And which is specifically why we asked Stephanie to be here, because that's something that she handles on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you can discuss how that affects mergers and acquisitions.
Absolutely. So I call it the step families. I have a stepmother and a step family. And we all came together when we were 11 and 14, my sisters. So I can remember those dinner tables. Initially, it was a little bit awkward, and we had to create sort of new family systems. So I think when we look at the companies and culture, I mean, it starts with each company has to focus on their culture first, right? And that's where cannabis tends to think that we're different businesses than typical business. So many operators think they don't need to follow best practices around HR and finance and operations and some of these back office functions that are the structure of a business. And so when they try to come together, if you don't have that clear on both sides, it's harder to meld it together because you all might be running in different directions versus the team's already running in the same. So I think it starts way before we get to the table and way before these companies come together is how do we actually create culture within an organization? What do we define it as? Not just words on the wall or a motto that we say or something that somebody signs off on, but how do we actually like live that through the organization? And in cannabis, when there's so much change and we're all running around and there's so much changing, we're always pivoting. It's like coming back to that center, that anchor that companies have. So I think for any operators thinking who are in the process of this or even early days is how do you actually implement culture and how do you live that and how do the values come out in what you're doing? And then ultimately, when we get to the place where we actually are bringing people together, it's about communication and clarity, right? People know changes are happening. They're not naive. They're seeing it, they're feeling it, they're hearing about it. So how do you actually make sure that they're part of that conversation? How do you make sure you're being transparent and making sure that everybody sitting around the table is aware to a point of what they need to know? And then also making sure that everybody feels like they have a part of that conversation so that they can come to the table and recognize that, okay, we're all going in this new direction and we value you. We see who you are. We know the work you've done to date, right? That history. And now we want to see where we're all going forward and making sure that you get the buy-in from the key stakeholders, the teammates, the people that are on the ground from top to bottom, and make sure that there's really that cohesive communication strategy as you're sort of moving through that step family.
Thank you. Jeanne, on another topic, you know, I remember when acquisitions started to happen, everyone was racing to the top for top line revenue. That was the only answer to be sold and bought. Today, that's changed quite a bit. Maybe you can touch upon what's important when it comes to valuations in the market today.
So, where I'm having some fun that I didn't mention in the intro is I've been playing in the international sandbox. And if you're here in the last session, I got the conversation going on exporting. Just think if we could export readily in the U.S. And I bring that up because I can see now what's happened in Europe, of which has been great fun to have a real active role there. Bringing some very interesting companies who, you know what I figured out? They've been learning from the US and the Canadians for years. And now I'm seeing some unbelievable best practices that are putting them in the position for great valuations. There are some companies doing 10, 20, 40, 50 million top line, importing products and distributing them to pharmacies. It is fascinating. So they got there by getting to scale. So back to the good question about valuation. First of all, number one thing that has to happen, and I'm involved, and I'm sure many of you are involved, is this a strategic sale or is it a financial sale? That makes the difference. And certainly, you know, if you have the EBITDA, if you have the top line, maybe you can pull it off on looking at all the multiples that are going to be important to help increase evaluation. But there's plenty of gaps. Big strategic companies or even smaller mid-sized companies that want to increase their footprint, that becomes a strategic sale. And then the valuation is not so rigid. You're filling a gap. And I think that's pretty exciting. And I think a lot of operators in our business here in the US don't really understand that till you show them that. And I think that's pretty exciting. So I'm involved in a few of those, and boy, I love working on that. Certainly harkens back to my past life, so that comes into play here.
Thank you. Another thing that's very important when it comes to M&A has to be also on top of the list, certainly on the mind, is legal issues. It can make a deal wipe out overnight if you're just missing the wrong sentence. I mean, it's just that simple. Now, lawyers play a very important role. I will tell you that they make deals happen. They make delays not happen. They make deals not happen sometimes because they're always looking for the interest of their client. Ron's a perfect example. You know, it might sound great, but if it's not great for his client, it's not going to offer it as advice. What are some of the things from a legal perspective do people need to do to be prepared from an M&A perspective?
So great question. And I've seen it happen a number of times. Cannabis industry a lot, but also in other industries. When you're building a company, particularly when it's early on in the game, last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of money on legal fees. So it's a tempting way to cut a few corners. Is do a little DIY on your form documents that you use for your employees, for example. And most of the time you get away with it. Most of the time, that's a dirty little secret of the legal industry is 9 times out of 10, there can be egregiously bad things in contracts and they'll never see the light of day. It only matters when it matters. And then it matters a whole lot. So, the two things that I would say are the most important thing, really 3 things in getting a company ready for M&A is, I can't emphasize this enough. You have to understand and know your own company. That seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people start the sale process and they're kind of clueless about what's going on. Someone else handled that particular relationship or that particular area, and there's been a lot of turnover. And where is that contract? I didn't even know we had that. So the single most important thing you can do is have somebody who is meticulously organized, a CFO type, and give them full visibility on every aspect of the operation and start putting together a very focused data room, and you should construct it in consultation with legal counsel. Why? Because legal counsel knows what that first due diligence request from the buyer is going to look like. They know how it's going to be organized, and they know everything that's going to get asked for. And do a deep dive in your own organization. Try to come up with everything that is likely to be responsive, and then organize it in a way that is easily navigable for somebody to get through. I think that's the one thing I've seen really make deals move in fits and starts is buyers looking for information and can't get it. And a lot of times when there's a lack of information, they'll fill it in with their own suppositions that may not be all that favorable for you. I usually don't see the problems on the financial side or the business due diligence side. That's almost always really tight. But it's these pesky legal contracts with employees, contracts with vendors, even things relating to investor documentation. Companies can get really sloppy with them.
I disagree that things don't fall apart on the financials, though, Ron.
Well, that's funny. That's a perfect segue to go to you, Michael. And what I was going to say to you, Michael, is that, a lot of people think investment bankers just sell a deal. They get a business, they get a deal, let's just sell the deal. There's a lot more to it from a guidance perspective, that it's more than that. It's preparing for a sale. It could be 6 months, could be 3 years down the road. That's why people work with appropriate investment bankers. So how do you see that fit into the role of mergers and acquisitions? Where does what you do, why is it so important?
I think that you should start earlier than later. I think even before you think about, hey, I'm going to sell my business down the road, you got to be thinking, how am I organizing different tracks of your business? You talked about the legal side. You mentioned the data room. Get your books in order. All the things that you've heard, a million times before. But I think if you have all of those teed up and know what you don't know, bring in teams. I think that's probably why we're all up here on a panel. Is one of the probably the most important or misunderstood things in an M&A process is how much time it consumes when you go into a deal process, that it's going to take from you and your team. So that could have a direct impact on the performance of your business, but it also impacts the leverage that you have in a deal. So if you're prepared, you will likely get rewarded in whether it's a multiple or ultimate valuation and headline price or deal terms or timing to actually getting a deal closed. And all of those things translate into dollars and risk adjusted cash that goes into your pocket at the end of the day. So prepare. There's a laundry list of things that you need to do to get there, but you're likely going to need a team to do it. So that would be my guidance on that.
Let me just pipe up and say, Ron, in the last session, Jamie Mendola said 1 week before the company had to turn in the financials, they marked up all the real estate 8x. And the buyer said, well, what's this? So I think there's a lot of shenanigans that have gone on and can go on. You're just dealing with clean clients, I guess, who don't do things like that.
Must be my luck.
He said it must be his luck.
I would, one other thing I would just add on why investment bankers are important to the process. I think it's that the best bankers will be those who can interject a degree of emotional intelligence in the process. Just from having seen, having dealt with parties in all aspects of what's involved, and they've seen stuff go south, and they know how people react. And these transactions are ultimately things that involve human beings, and sometimes there's an emotional element to it as well. So you really need. That's like to my mind the single most important thing that bankers can bring to a process is they're sort of like a catalyst. They drive the process forward, but they're also a sounding board for everybody to gripe about how everybody else in the deal is being unreasonable.
Psychologists.
That's funny. I was going to say, because I do similar work for my business, and one of the things that Michael can attest to is we oftentimes act as that conduit of communications. Communications or lack thereof can kill a deal. If you don't have the right communications between both parties, and some shouldn't be talking if it's not directly through their attorneys. So oftentimes the investment banker gets to play that role. Suffice to say.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, it's more of the process, right? And once you're in a deal process, I guess I was talking a little bit more about the lead up into a process and a sale. But yeah, I mean, why do you hire an investment banker? You hire an investment banker to run a process. Process, at the end of the day, creates leverage, and leverage is gained in several different areas of like leading up into an LOI. That might be your last point or highest point of leverage. And if you haven't negotiated every point that you want to in an LOI, once you've signed it, that ship has sailed, and the leverage now shifts back to the buyer. And it will anyway, but it's just a matter of how much. So it's important to cover things like, define what purchase price actually is. What is adjusted EBITDA? And okay, great, we're getting a 5x multiple as our quote unquote purchase price, but what is adjusted EBITDA? What are the line items that are included in that? How are you defining working capital? Working capital can tank a deal more times than you'd realize. And what's going to be included in working capital? Oftentimes it will include third-party advisors like accounting firms to run a quality of earnings for our clients that we're advising. So as part of the preparation, it's part of knowing what you're going into and negotiating points before you are passing the baton on the leverage.
When you're going to sell a business, oftentimes it does include people. And I mentioned earlier about the importance of culture. What do you think, Stephanie, is the biggest problem that businesses do in not preparing themselves for a sale when it comes to their own people?
Yeah, I think in cannabis, there's a lack of sort of focus on excellence around people in businesses, and it becomes sort of a forethought or a later thought or when everything's not working. But there isn't sort of that idea of like, how do we create a expectation of excellence in our organizations around people? And that could be basic HR function, right? And under 280E, there's a lot of conversations. I know that's a deeper conversation, but ultimately, how are you from the beginning of your operation when you start creating an excellence around your people, your talent? Because ultimately that's your business. And so when we're getting in early days, even if you think you're so far out from when you're going to sell a business, or you just started, or you just got your license, how do you actually look at how your talent and your people are going to bring you to the level where you can consider this, or you can have your company be wanted to be bought by somebody else or to be appealing to another? And so looking at how you actually create a fundamental structure in your business, org charts, job description, proper compensation, culture, HR, right? Putting the right people in the right seats, making sure that your experts are actually experts, and then you back them up, right? Heads of cultivation, that's the number one type of search we search on. When I headhunt someone out of an operation, I know how much that's going to ripple down the company that I'm taking them from. But the right company has built that person, and that person has built a team where that team knows and has learned and can actually step in, and there's sort of always a backup. So your key personnel, especially in cannabis, these very talented people that know what they're doing and are the reason why you might be known for your products or your cultivation or your operations or your tech or whatever you're working on, making sure there's sort of additional people in the team that have that expertise and can kind of stand around them, and making sure you're bringing through that idea that your people are a big part of your business and owning that as an owner as well. There's also an interesting point, obviously, when you go from owner operated to professionally managed. So that's a deeper conversation, but bringing in the right experts as well, not having your cousin be your accountant early days, fine. But ultimately, if you're starting to really professionalize your business and bring it to that next level, you need to bring the people around you. And that's going to cost you some money. You're going to have to put some investment in. Good people cost money. You want to be fair in the market, because you also don't want to have a reputation that you build that will go with you, right? And that's why that excellence from the beginning. And you don't have a Glassdoor reviews where you're 1.8 stars from 20 employees talking about how awful you are. And you're like, well, that was 4 years ago. We're different. It's like, that'll always go with you. And that's when people are doing due diligence, they'll see that. So making sure that we're really building that center of excellence around our people and valuing the talent, and looking at yourself as an owner operator as well. Like, I'm an owner operator of my company, fully bootstrapped, but it's like, what am I good at? Great. I'm going to focus there. What am I not so great at, or what don't I know, or where are my gaps? And how do I build my team around me for that, so that I leverage who I am, and also I'm humble enough to step back and let experts come in. So I think it's really about empowering the team, right seats, right time, and really thinking about that longer term vision from day one.
Jeanne, let me ask you a question. Do groups come to you and say, we're looking to sell our business, and do you ever flip that around and say, well, maybe you're not ready to be sold, but there might be ways that we can find capital for you that would make sense for your growth?
Happens all the time, including today. So yeah, I think, but that tells me that team has some self-awareness. Do they want to build it out, grow it up a little bit? Because back to the whole valuation, how do you make this happen issue? Uh, if you get into the financial trap of multiple on EBITDA or revenue, especially when EBITDA is negative, not even something to really talk about, yeah, you want to grow that up unless you've got that great strategic advantage. Why did MasterCard buy one of our companies that was only 15 million top line for over $280 million? Why did Trimble buy one of our companies? They wanted to get into precision ag. This company had very low revenues and a big multiple on that. And so that's back to that strategic opportunity. So if you can build it up so that it could be really attractive, because you've got some numbers, great, but yeah, I think that is important. And then to give guidance to that company would be great. Additional partners. The best story I can tell you, it was a Chicago-based company. This is in my tech fund. He did have that unique unfair advantage, and on bid day, he had 18 bids. Why did he do that, and how did he do that? Because he knew these potential partners, many of them. He was playing racquetball and golf with them and currying them, just like you said, starting the process much earlier. And I think that is one of the tricks to really build those partners early on, that you can then bring them to the table and have them, put that bid in at the right timing. How exciting is that when it all happens that way? Now we got to make that happen more in our cannabis world.
I'd like to just,
Would be a good number, yeah.
I'd like to ask you all the same final question, and then if we have time, open it up to anyone in the audience who might have one. But I'm going to ask each of you. Imagine there's an operator in the audience that hopes to sell their company 3 years from now. What is the one thing they should start doing tomorrow morning to maximize value and improve their chances of a successful transaction? So we're going to start with Ron. So we're going to work the opposite way and let Stephanie be last.
I think there are a number of things that you need to do, but the single most important thing to maximize your value is make sure that you have make sure that you have your ducks in a row, and that you're ready to answer the questions that come. You don't get a timeout once the process starts and it gains momentum. You don't get a timeout to try to get your act together. You got to have your act together. Got to understand your business. You have to understand your team. You have to understand where the weak spots are. You have to understand how those weak spots are going to get fixed, and what it is that the buyer can do to sort of fill those holes and make what you're selling them truly valuable.
Thank you, Michael.
Not a shameless plug, but I would say just engage with an advisor, an investment banker. Talk to one. They can provide a lot of guidance about the market. I think it's important to, especially in cannabis, each market has its own nuances. And I think the buyer universe for any particular market could be drastically different market to market. And aside from, just the readiness part of it, I would just say talk to a banker, talk to an advisor.
That corporate hygiene is so important. And that means that really your numbers are really in place. And then more than just the CEO and CFO should be very conversant in what the operational details are. Again, that's part of that corporate hygiene. How does it all work in various departments, more than just the top two people? And that shows. That really is a big draw, let's say, to a potential acquirer, how it works here. And wow, impressed that the flywheel is working. And you know what? I'm sorry to say this, that's rare. So our business, this cannabis business, it's just so different from the tech life that I, grew up in. And so we need to do better there, modeling some of those best practices. It's so evident when it's done beautifully.
Before Stephanie chimes in, I would say, different than the tech industry, but we are more fun.
We
Please,
are
go
a lot
ahead,
more fun, and that's
Stephanie.
what keeps us in this crazy business.
That's right.
Of Course, and I'm going to come back to talent, right? Talent and human capital strategy, just making sure you're thinking about who's on your team. I think the average person I see in cannabis is at a company for like a year, maybe. So if you're looking 3 years out, you're going to have 3 teams and 3 iterations. Maybe, if you're going to have your builders and then you're going to have your optimizers, that's a different way to look at talent in the strategy, and maybe you work with fractionals to sort of feel that out in the beginning, and then you transition over to more of the team that's going to run the machine, I call it, versus the builders of the machine. But then on the other side of it, it's like, how do you get in the right people so that for the next 3 years, you are refining the machine, they are growing with you, they have the buy-in, they want to be part of it, they're growing the company to really all that you envision it to be, and you really have that solid core team, that really solid reputation. And you might have to pay a little more upfront, you might have to invest in working with a recruitment company, working with people that can come in and really help you with that strategic talent assessment and understanding right seats, right time, and skill set across your operations. But doing that now is setting that foundation that's solid enough that you can stand on in the future, and the rest of your employees, the rest of your team will stand on that as well. So I really think it's about that foundational understanding of like, you are here and how do you build the solid beginning of the house so that you can build on top of it.
If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to hand you the microphone.
I think I'm good without it.
He is good without it.
For Ron, so often it seems that with the lease portfolio for properties, for companies that have leased properties, ends up the holdup getting those lease assignments pre-closed. Other than permitted transfer provisions, are there any other strategies that you've employed to make sure that you don't end up with that holdup the way it so often goes?
In contracts and your
Like leases, because of the fact that, at least in my experience, so often negotiating with landlords that are used to taking a yearly pound of flesh from cannabis operators, they use that as an opportunity to extract more capital, or maybe they want an additional guarantor, or so many other things because they feel that they have that point of leverage. If you're looking at it the way that you are on the front end, trying to prepare the business for sale, are there any other strategies that you've employed to make sure that you don't end up with them kind of holding the bag at the end and potentially holding up the transaction?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, leases are a great example you gave, but a lot of times you see problematic provisions in vendor contracts too. And, particularly development stage companies, will spend a lot of money on legal review, just take the contract that the vendor sent and sign it, right? It's a standard contract. What could be in there? Well, there's a lot of times there are problematic provisions in vendor contracts as well. They do tend to center around the assignment provisions. Like that's the clear number one. And it might have language in there that outright requires consent for assignment. And if it's a critical vendor, it's not a situation where a buyer is going to be comfortable just saying, yeah, well, we're going to buy it and we'll worry about that post closing, because if that vendor relationship or supply relationship are lost, the company would be in deep trouble. So from time to time, there's you see, I don't know, like arbitration provisions come up sometimes, dispute resolution provisions that are in contracts that are kind of unwieldy or that a buyer doesn't like. But I do think you identified the one that is the most problematic. But you really need to go through your contracts, review through them. Sometimes also there might be penalty provisions. See those in loan documents, but sometimes in vendor arrangements too. If you're late making a payment, there'll be financial penalties that have to be paid, and sometimes those are again things that buyers find really unfavorable and will create problems in the transaction for you. So how do you avoid that? I would say as much as possible, try to use standard terms. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, a lot of law firms are using artificial intelligence tools. They're gonna be able to help you identify problematic provisions in vendor and other agreements and help you negotiate better language more and more economically as time goes on. But I would say, like, you definitely spend the time and effort on everything that you sign versus just thinking take the form and we'll worry about it later.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. We'll go to you second if that's okay. No, you please.
Just a comment and a question. Comment. That was a great panel. Thank you very much. The composition of the panel and the coverage for folks looking at M&A, top notch. Thank you very much. The question is around deal structure. In the work that I'm doing globally on M&A, some of which alongside Jeanne and Stephanie, we obviously there's a lack of liquidity in the M&A space, and often it's deal structures have to be very creative. We're looking at different types of share swaps, earn-outs, VTBs, a number of different things that need to be in play to try to kind of take away the need for cold hard cash across the table. So I just thought I'd raise that as what's your view on the need to be creative when it comes to deal structure in today's cannabis industry from your vantage points?
Yeah, I can go first. I think part of it depends on what the transaction is, right? Like, I think the size of a transaction is a starting point, right? So the bigger the transaction, and if somebody wants a certain amount of cash in a deal in a big transaction, we're talking orders of magnitude. That's a bigger problem to have on the cash side. So there's probably going to be more of a need for structured consideration across the board. Earnouts. I mean, we're seeing everything across the board. I mean, at a starting point, it's less cash, more note, earnout bridges the gap, and then, are we talking about anything else beyond that? Like a rollover equity, for example, which we're increasingly seeing, I think, even for private companies, and I think that's a roadblock for many transactions to get done. It's just understanding, hey, we want to do a private-to-private stock swap, essentially, and who's my counterparty and what are they valuing their company at? And so you got to do counter diligence on another private company, and that's a whole thing in its own, right? So that's what we're seing.
So we've probably got 1 minute left. So good question.
So Stephanie mentioned turnover, employee turnover, and Jeanne mentioned kind of poor corporate hygiene. Are there any other cannabis-specific pain points that you can speak to? I love that everything's been very general and in terms of advice given. I was very curious from like a cannabis brand perspective, are there other pain points that are unique, whether regulatory, tax, what have you?
Say make sure what you're doing is legal. I think that's something in our industry. There's still, fortunately, I hear different stories. And so I think, and I heard about this recently where, a company found out that someone who'd been in the company for a while was doing things that are unethical and things are still going out the back door. And ultimately that disrupts the company and really is a cannabis specific challenge given the regulatory hurdles that we're all facing.
I'd say tax compliance as well. That's another thing that people don't like to pay a lot of attention to because it's not particularly fun. But not just sales and use taxes in terms of product that you're selling, but how is the company structured? If it's a pass-through entity, how have gains and losses been allocated among the partners? Companies can get fast and loose on that stuff, and that ultimately creates a problem that becomes the buyer's problems, and they will identify it in diligence.
I'd just like to end by saying one of the last questions I asked was, what can an operator do tomorrow to prepare themselves? And what that really means is you can start today. You can start tomorrow. If there are things that you haven't done, start putting them in place, because there's no better thing than to be prepared for a sale or a buy. So with that in mind, thank you all for coming today. Panelists will be available outside if you'd like to speak with them.